On the phone, it is a pleasure to welcome to the program Sonia Shah. She's an independent investigative journalist and author of Pandemic: Tracking Contagions from Cholera to Ebola and Beyond, as well as The Next Migration, The Beauty and Terror of Life on the Move, and a piece in The Nation magazine. It's time to tell a news story about coronavirus. In that piece, and here we are, Sonia, with 155,000 dead. We haven't, not only have we not seemed to contained the virus, we have not in any way seemed to have made any progress in conceptualizing how we might contain it. There doesn't seem to be an effort. It's barely accepted that it existed, that exists as far as the White House is concerned. Tell us, what is the story that we are telling ourselves about coronavirus, and frankly, I think you would argue pandemics more broadly speaking.
Well, I think the story we've been telling is that this is something that is fairly simple to repel if we just had the right drug or vaccine, if we just had the right sort of biomedical commodity, and we just need to kind of quickly create one and use that as a weapon against this invasive germ that's sort of encroaching upon us from foreign bodies and foreign lands. And, I think that plays itself out in a lot of different ways, but the most deadly way is that it makes us minimize our own role. And so rather than thinking of this as something, well, we have to change our behaviors. We have to change our collective behaviors in order to minimize the spread of this virus between us, in order to, reduce the risk that a virus like this would emerge in the first place. We don't really think about all that stuff because we just say, oh, a new virus, let's quickly get a new drug, get a new vaccine, and we'll just, hang tight until we have these new sort of biomedical commodities to save us. And I think what we're seeing already is that that's not enough. We already have 150,000 people dead, and the vaccine is nowhere to be seen. And whether we get one in, October or next year, it's a huge death toll we're going to face before we have any such tools. And then, of course, there's all the other questions about whether that vaccine will really save us. I think there's real questions to be asked about that as well.
All right. So, we have there's two subsets, it seems to me, of the paradigm that you're talking about. One is sort of how we should behave. One is how we should structure our societies to be more resilient for something like this. And then the other is, how do we address this now that it's here, right? Those are the two sort of it seems to me, two sort of, I guess, silos of responses to this. One of the things that occurs to me is that, I've spoken to epidemiologists who are 6 months after the first peak, it comes back in a second peak. And I'm becoming very much convinced that that is not a function of the virus as much as a function of human beings, getting overconfident or not taking it seriously. So let's focus first on the question of with a new paradigm, how do we address this from this point forward?
Well, I think the way we address this is to really put at the foreground of our efforts, the absolute highest priority is behavior change, is changing the way the virus is allowed to spread between us because it's exploiting human behaviors. So how do we do that? Do we spend billions of dollars developing a vaccine and throwing money at drug companies? Or do we spend all of that money trying to figure out through social science and anthropology and psychology, how much money do you have to give to a single mom so she can stay home and not go to work if it endangers her life? How much support do you have to give to a school in order to make it safe and reduce transmission opportunities inside that school? All of those things that we're kind of talking about in a really a half-baked way, in a sort of very dismissive fashion where we're not really throwing nearly enough resources or attention to it. Those are the things that should be as important, more important than the race for the vaccine. So there's so many questions we're not even asking. We don't even know, like, for example, what is the infective dose? So we don't know how much virus do you need to be exposed to in order to get sick, right? We don't really know what that is because that's not a priority question for us. Right? If we knew that, then we would know what kinds of behaviors are most risky. And we have a very crude understanding of that right now. So what I'm saying is we need to think of this as something that is about human behavior. It's not about the evil germ that we have to kill with, some killing chemical. It's about how we spread it. And so that means we need to all get together and think really carefully and spend our resources figuring out how can we reshape our society so that this thing can't spread as quickly between us.
I read an interview with you that you gave in January. I think it was like right towards the end of January, and it is it's a little bit eerie. I mean, you seem to know stuff then about the virus that our government didn't seem to even acknowledge as late as like April or May. I mean, so I guess, the point of what you're saying on some level is that, like, we are making choices and we are not conscious of the choices that we are making. We're sort of like backing into them, or people who are making these choices for us are doing it on the basis of something other than how do we deal with coronavirus?
Yes, I think that's exactly right. And I don't think it's just me. I mean, I think if the whole reason I was able to write a book about pandemics, about how microbes turn into pandemic-causing pathogens and cause all this death and disruption, is because so much is known. We know how this happens, right? We know where these microbes originate from. We know how they spill over into human populations. We know how they spread between us, and we know what it takes to vanquish them. We've done it many times in the past. And the way we have vanquished new pathogens in the past is not through a magic bullet drug or a wonder shot. It's just not. That is not what the history has shown. The way we have conquered malaria, cholera, tuberculosis, typhoid, any number of pathogens that used to take thousands and thousands of lives in Western countries for decades and centuries was through social reform. It was not because we came up with some fancy new vaccine or antibiotic. In fact, the most success we've ever had taming a pathogen with a vaccine was with smallpox. And that vaccine was based on, centuries old folk remedies that were common in Asia and Africa. So it wasn't a high-tech product. Now, I'm not saying that, the drugs and vaccines that the pharmaceutical industry provides for us are not useful. They're hugely useful, but they're not useful in taming a pathogen when it is, newly emerged and causing an epidemic. Those things work when you have those problems under control already, and they kind of keep it down to a low level if you use them correctly. But to have a huge outbreak like we're having now, and to expect like a single vaccine to suddenly come and save us it's fantasy. It's an ahistorical idea.
It's ahistorical. What do you think the incentive structures are to frame it that way? I mean, is it simply because is it a combination of humans have a pretty poor imagination, or is it a combination of that and humans have a pretty poor imagination when they stand to profit in not imagining?
I mean, I think it's partially that. It's also just an artifact of our history. So we had kind of tamed a lot of the really bad pathogens that used to plague us through clean water and sanitation and rules around like food contamination and better housing. All of those things really tamed a lot of pathogens that used to, cause pandemics and epidemics in the past. And then we came up with antibiotics and vaccines, and, we have this evidence-based medicine that really we heroized, and we decided, well, that those things are what saved us. And it really, we indoctrinated several generations of Americans into believing that infectious diseases were a thing of the past. And these were things that you could easily control. It's just an infection. Get a course of antibiotics. It's $30 or $40, right? That kind of rhetoric tells you all of it right there. We don't say, oh, it's just cancer, get some chemotherapy, because we know cancer is a big problem. You got to do a lot of different things to deal with it, right? Well, infectious diseases can be a big problem too. They're complex. And we're seeing when we have these new diseases where we don't have, something off the shelf that we can use, whether it's Zika or Ebola or any number of the new pathogens we're seeing today, including coronavirus, that we don't have something readily available and we can't make it fast enough. So then what do you do, right? Then what happens? The way we've been trained has sort of divorced us from that reality that we lived with for many centuries before this.
Are there countries that are doing this correctly at this point? I mean, over the weekend, it seemed like there were new problems that were developing in different countries in Europe. Now, I think their definition of what a problem is relative to ours, I think is they seem to be much more sensitive about it. Like they're ringing the alarm bells when, for something that, we would be like, oh, great, we can just send people to school, no problem, open up everything. I mean, they have different set of standards, but because this, at the end of the day, the virus is just not going to walk away at one point because people are doing the right thing. But are there models out there that you think are particularly successful?
I mean, I think all of those countries that are having minor eruptions that are then quickly contained, that's the best you can hope for, right? Like you can't have zero. That's not a realistic goal. So you can't have zero, but can you get in front of it so that when I think of it as like a fire, can you contain it when it's still an ember, when it's still just a spark? Or are you waiting for a bonfire and then you're smelling the smoke from 10 miles away and then you're coming and dealing with it? That's what we're doing in the United States. We're smelling the smoke, and we don't know where the fire is. And by the time we recognize that it's happening, it's already huge. And then, then we have to take very crude measures, or we pretend it's not happening, or, any number of the sort of chaotic responses that we're seeing. But in these other countries, they're getting ahead of it. So they are screening, they are doing surveillance, they know where those sparks and embers are. And as soon as they start to ignite a little bit, they go and they, put the fire out. So that is the best case scenario. The fact that we're talking about it in the same way is just indicative of our lack of understanding about how this pandemic is going to unfold, that you're not going to be in a place where there's zero cases and zero introductions. As long as the virus exists in the world anywhere, it's going to come into different places because we are highly mobile. Whether we're crossing international borders or not, we are moving around and we are interacting with each other because we're humans and that's what we do. So, we're talking about it all in the same breath as if, oh, well, South Korea had a little outbreak now, so they're not doing so well either. That's just totally the wrong way to think about it. What we should be looking at is the cases per 100,000, like something where you can compare apples to apples. And then I think you'll be more clear that what they're doing is they're getting out in front of it. What we're doing is completely reactive if we're doing anything at all.
Right. It is just that they are far more sensitive to these things than we seem to be, because that is part and parcel of why they're doing a better job of this. Let's break down the sort of the where we can see our, not just our because what you're talking about is perceiving coronavirus and pathogens like this as something that is, no silver bullet is going to deal this. We need to sort of have almost like a wellness approach as a society heading into this. But before we get to sort of that full-on idea, give me a sense of how these other societies, for the most part, also are better situated to deal with these things than we are, right? I mean, both as like they have mechanisms so that they can pay people. Like even if we decided tomorrow, for whatever reason, the Republicans said like, yeah, we're gonna do a regular payments, not just for unemployment, but we're going to do it for everybody. or something to that effect. We don't really have a very good mechanism for it. We didn't have a particularly good mechanism for it in terms of the paycheck protection program. Other societies have better mechanisms for this and for delivery of healthcare. Give me a sense of how, like, what you think would be different in this country if by fluke we just had a more robust healthcare system in terms of I want to say if we had Medicare for all, 10 years ago, but if we did, we'd probably be a different society that would have reacted to all of this very differently anyway. So it's sort of hard to say that in terms of like, if we had wings, we would be flying. But give me a sense of how it would work. I mean, just forget the sort of like the personality of the country and our disposition. If we had that physical, if aliens had imposed Medicare for all on us, grudgingly 3 years ago, how would we be different? What things would be different from a practical standpoint?
I think we would, we already do this, right? So this is, I don't think this is like controlling this pandemic. I don't think that's somehow, alien to our system. Like we do this all the time in public health in this country, and we do it successfully. We have little outbreaks of, say, measles or, chickenpox or HIV or syphilis or, there's all these other pathogens that we have little outbreaks, here and there. We do surveillance. Doctors let, the CDC know and their state health departments know. And we do exactly what we're talking about trying to do with coronavirus, which is testing and socially, supported isolation, contact tracing and isolation. Those are things that work. That's just a regular tool of public health. We've been doing it in this country for a long time. We just have completely failed to do it with this one. I don't think there's any structural reason why we couldn't do it. I think it's the reason we're not doing it is absolutely political. It was a political choice that our leadership made. Because whether it was incompetence or just a lack of understanding, or because they thought it was politically useful for them to try to ignore it and make it into a fight. Whatever the reason is, and we'll be talking and figuring that out for probably years to come. But could we have controlled this with our existing infrastructure? Yes, because we would have done it much earlier. It wouldn't have become such a huge problem where you need 300,000 contact tracers. That's what we need now. That's what we need now because we have so many cases, because there's so much virus just in the community across the whole country. But if we had responded in January and February when this thing was first coming out and when the WHO sounded the alarm, and we had a system in place here, we had a plan, we had a pandemic plan team that was, installed at the very highest echelons of our government. We have a public health system. It's not as robust as in other countries, but it's certainly up to the task if you have a new virus and it's not everywhere all at once, So we could have activated that and it could have worked. But now we're in a totally different situation because now we have so much virus that it's completely overwhelmed the capacity that we had, even if we had the political will to actually use it, which we don't.
So when we tell a different story of coronavirus, are we really, has the ship sailed here? I don't anticipate, we're watching now a Republican Congress who it appears to me have basically said, we got the things we wanted most urgently, which was corporate, basically a corporate line of credit for as long as the eye can see. It propped up the stock market, and the rest of it, we just don't feel that much of an urgency about. So we're not going to do anything. We're probably going to lose the election anyways. So this is going to become Joe Biden's problem. Meanwhile, the Democrats are out there and they're, what they're pushing for is some of it is good. States, municipalities are definitely going to need money, but subsidizing Cobra, that's a huge waste. It's couldn't be more inefficient. They're not talking about things like the post office and whatnot. I know that doesn't directly deal with coronavirus, but even if Joe Biden becomes president, he's becoming president 6 months from now. And we've been in this for from March to August. is the same amount of time from August to January. And
right.
it's been this bad up to this point. We're going to move into a phase soon where the administration is either, incapable of doing anything, or maybe after November, they're like, we're going to make this a nightmare for Joe Biden because that's their mentality. I mean, so is when we talk about looking at this, being conscious of the choices that we're making, is that going to make a difference in the context of what we're dealing with now? Like, I have no idea where we'll be in 5 months from now, but it can't be in a good place. And like you say, right now we need 300,000 contact tracers. 4 months ago, we would have needed, tens of thousands, maybe. Where are we going to be 4 or 5 months from now?
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, what I still haven't completely wrapped my head around is what actually creates political will to deal with this in our current environment. And it seems to be when the ICUs are overwhelmed, like at the local level, right? Like at the federal level, I agree with what you're saying completely. But at the local level, at least some municipalities and states, once ICUs kind of reach capacity, that's when they start getting freaked out and say, okay, wait a second, like, let's do something. So, I saw that in the state of Maryland, for example, and now I live in the state of Maryland. And so in the beginning, it looked like our ICUs were going to get overwhelmed. And so Governor Hogan said, okay, let's shut down, because that was something he did not want to see. He thought that would look really bad for him and, of course, be bad for the state. But now we have cases that are going right back up to the levels they were before. The deaths are going up right back to the levels they were before. However, we now have extra ICU capacity. So his response is, well, let's just keep on keeping on. We don't need to change too much, or maybe just around the edges, because the ICUs aren't getting overwhelmed. So that seems to be the one thing that kind of makes municipalities act. Of course, by then it's like way too late to actually, get in. The only thing you can do then is do the hard shutdown. And the hard shutdown is very costly. I mean, not just to the economy, but people lose their lives in the hard shutdown because, you get a heart attack and you don't go to the hospital because you're scared to go. So you have all this kind of follow-on effect. And I think, unfortunately, we're just going to have to muddle through with what we're doing now. I mean, to me, it's become like school shootings where everyone said it's horrible, but we're at a complete stalemate and we don't move forward at all, even as the problem gets worse and worse. And I think that's what we're seeing. And, if we actually get a government in November that has at least the political will to do something about it, we can start to slowly dig ourselves out. But you're right, it's going to be a much bigger problem then. The one tiny silver lining to all this is, every epidemic collapses at some point on its own, whether or not you do anything at all, because the pathogen just runs out of susceptible individuals. People have either got it already, or they had it and died, or they had it and survived, right? So right now, probably 15% of Americans have had this thing, considering that, if we take into account that probably 10 times more people have actually had it than are reflected in the numbers, that means around 10, 15% of the population has had it. Once we get to, 40, 50%, then the virus doesn't even have anywhere to go, and you start to see a natural decline. And it's possible that we might get there, sooner rather than later because of the chaotic way we're responding to this thing.
There's also been, and I don't know if this is outside your portfolio, but there's also been some suggestion that there is an existing immunity because people have had some form of a coronavirus in the past. Someone has pointed out that we've not seen any municipality, any state, any country that has had an over 25% infection rate, which is strange. You would imagine that maybe there'd be one place that would, and maybe it'll be America, but it where things have been so botched, or the thing spreads like wildfire, and you can't get over that rate. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is some municipalities where we do have like Corona creams, they did an antibody study there, and it was like over 50% of people had antibodies. So, that's approaching the level that you would need so that even if the virus is introduced into that community, it doesn't have enough places to spread. So it can't, kind of burst out into an outbreak. So I think it is happening on cells. I mean, we're not doing very good tracking of this. So, we're not doing surveillance studies. We're not doing like widespread antibody studies. So we don't really know. We're really so much in the dark with all of this. But at least on these, when we focus in on certain places that scientists have done a few studies, it does seem like there's some places where that might be happening. I mean, this is a very, very cruel way to deal with a pathogen. When you have tools you can use against it, and yet you just, don't use them and let a lot of people die to get to population immunity naturally. I mean, that's extremely brutal. And we'll have to live with sort of the moral implications of that for a long time. But I think it is possible that is where we're heading to, and that in certain places in the country that, we might already or be approaching it.
I want to get back to sort of the, trying to anticipate how we're going to react to this when we are sort of on the other side of it. But let me ask you this question too. One of the things that, how much do you know about the transfer of data from the CDC to, via the White House? When this was first announced in mid-July, people I spoke to were like, well, the CDC hasn't done that great of a job anyways, and most of the stuff we're relying on is sort of outside data. It's been pointed out to me, and I really don't know what to make of it, but coincidentally, around that day, around July 16th, 17th, when the data supposedly starts to move to the White House, we start to see a flatlining of, we're just putting up the thing right now. You can see this right around July 16th. It goes up to a peak, I don't know, maybe a day or two later on the 18th. And then it starts to flatline and even drop a little bit. And how much of that is, I mean, I don't know. I'm not in these states where things are expanding significantly, but I'm a little bit surprised that it had, that at the beginning, prior to July 4th, in these places, people started to respond in such a, in a more responsible way. I find that hard to believe. What do you have any sense of like what the implications are of that switch in the way that we were collecting data?
I mean, I'm very skeptical of all the data that we're looking at. There's a lot of ways in which bad actors can fudge the data. It's because contagious diseases are hard to track, and that's been true for all the infectious diseases of our past. So it's not peculiar to coronavirus. On top of that, we have just sort of the fog of war and, the chaos of this new thing that's overwhelming hospitals, and they don't know where to send their data, and they don't have the spreadsheets and the databases and set up and all of that stuff. So, and I think we have already seen a lot of evidence from the Trump administration that they would prefer the numbers to be different. And there's so many ways in which they can change things so that they are different. They've done that in the past with other disasters, like, the way data is collected around like who dies from hurricanes or who dies from antibiotic resistant bacterial pathogens. There's all these ways in which our data on these things are politicized. And so I would be very surprised if there aren't some political influences on the data collection we're getting right now. And I think that move to take away the hospitalization data from the CDC and put it, directly with the Department of Health and Human Services definitely stank of political influence. And my understanding is that, they're justifying it as saying, well, we're trying to streamline it. But in fact, they've contracted it out to some outside company that is actually making more of a mess of it, at least for the time being. So I think the best data for me as a journalist that has been reporting on infectious diseases for all these years when you look at a new pathogen, what you want to look at in the end is excess mortality. Deaths always go up and down in a predictable fashion just because of the age structure of the population. And you can see if there's more people dying during a certain period, whether they, whatever they're dying of. It's ultimately, that's the number to me that's going to really tell the whole story of how many people died who would have otherwise lived during this period. And we can see in excess mortality already that there's a huge spike.
Right.
There's a huge spike starting in March, April, et cetera, and it's going on. I mean, excess mortality data comes out late. You don't get it right away. So this is something that's useful for looking backwards and seeing what happened. But, I think given all this, we saw, and even state by state, a lot of the state officials are trying to cover up or massage the data. CDC tried to massage the data on the testing when that was a whole stink. So, all of our numbers are soft. And that's been true for every other contagious disease in the past also.
There is another metric, too, that seems incredibly soft to me that is I think, really problematic. And that is we don't, everything at least, and I spend a lot of time reading about this stuff. All of my knowledge about the implications of getting this seem anecdotal in terms of the long-term or even the midterm health implications. I mean, I have a friend who she got it in the first, right in the middle of March. And apparently she still doesn't have a sense of smell. I mean, that's, that's 4 or 5 months out. That's a fairly long-term, issue. We're seeing there's, you read an article here about there are heart damage, perhaps, even if you don't, even if you thought you have recovered. I mean, we have doesn't seem to be any central repository that is tracking the health implications of people once they've recovered. We have that number, right? This is how many cases, this is how many recovered, this is how many dead, this is how many active, but we don't have any sense of like the long-term. I mean, is it 1 out of 5 people have long-term complications? 1 out of 3, 1 out of 10? We have no idea, right?
Yeah. And I think we won't until this thing sort of progresses further. And that doesn't surprise me so much because, when you have a novel pathogen, everyone's going to have an idiosyncratic response because as a species, we haven't encountered this thing before. So like in the past, we've encountered, you can see this in our genetic changes that, there'll be like the diversity of genomes around this one part of our DNA. And then a new pathogen comes in and basically wipes out a whole bunch of people who had certain kinds of genetic sequences. And then you get this homogenization. And so then everyone has, all the people who survive have a kind of similarity between them because everyone who is different, didn't make it essentially. And so the fact that we're seeing a lot of idiosyncratic responses to this pathogen doesn't surprise me because it is new. So there's going to be a lot of people who, they're going to just have a response that's not the same as everyone else's. And, characterizing that is very complicated and it's going to take time for all of that to come out. So, I don't think with any contagious disease, there's idiosyncratic responses, but for most of our pathogens, we all have some kind of immunity, at least even if I didn't ever get this particular strain of flu that we get this winter, like my grandmother did, because we've had these pathogens in our families, like for generations. And that kind of weeds out certain sort of idiosyncratic responses because those people basically don't make it. And so that process is just starting now for us with coronavirus.
Okay. So lastly, let me ask you this, and it's probably a big question though, to make the last question, but you've written extensively about cholera and and Zika and Ebola. But I wonder if, and one of the things in the reading that I've been doing over the past couple of months is, sort of the one theme about the 1918 flu pandemic is just how much it seemed to have been erased from our national consciousness. I mean, obviously there, scholars were aware of it, but I grew up knowing about the Great Depression and the Civil War. The pandemic never really, just sort of like maybe I heard it a little bit, but it wasn't a big topic. And apparently, Wilson never even addressed it. And now I'm getting the sense of like, in part why that is, because I frankly, like, I'm so sick of this that, if we get to the other side of this and I never mention a single word of it again, I will be happy. But what do you like with what we're talking about, having seen and maybe it was because, social sciences had not moved further enough, or maybe it was because during at least the last pandemic that this country had to deal with, we were still sort of in the wake of the discovery of the germ theory, or the development of the germ theory, that there wasn't enough time spent on like the sociological implications of a pandemic. But what do you anticipate, like, what comes out of this when you start talking about like the moral implications of the decisions that are being made here? Do you think that there is an opportunity for the real sort of like a real assessment of the sort of wellness of our society in terms of our ability to be resilient in what will inevitably be future pandemics? And if, what folks like yourself and others have been saying is the case, we're going to get more of these because of the nature of how we are essentially gobbling up nature.
Yeah, I mean, talk about historical amnesia. Like, we've forgotten the 1918 flu until just now, but we also have forgotten that we have other pandemics going on right now. HIV was a brand new pathogen in 1982. No one had ever seen anything like it before, and millions of people got it. It is a pandemic. It is going on right now. People are still getting sick. People are still dying of HIV. So we still have a cholera pandemic going on right now, just a few hundred miles off the coast of Florida and Haiti in the Western Hemisphere. We don't really think about those because there are drugs and vaccines, at least for wealthy people. So, we don't even give them a second thought, as if those are risks in our lives anymore, because we don't, we can get a pill, we can get a vaccine. So why even think about it? So, it's true. We have forgotten the 1918 flu until now, but we've also forgotten these other pandemics that are actually going on right now, besides the coronavirus pandemic. But in terms of your question, how will we emerge from this in the future after this whole thing collapses? My hope is that if somebody can pinpoint that the reason why this virus spilled over into human populations has something to do with what I suspect, deforestation, which allowed bats to come into closer contact with humans and facilitate, hunting and selling them for food and all the other things that, humans do with bats that allows their microbes to come into our bodies. Those are all roughly implicated by deforestation, which is roughly implicated in our massive expansion of the industrial economy. That then we will start to see, like, okay, these are things that we should have public health controls on, so that when the next mining company says, you know what, we want to set up, this mine and cut down this part of the Brazilian rainforest, that it wouldn't just be environmentalists saying, no, don't do that because there's all these special species in there and it's really important to us, et cetera. It wouldn't just be indigenous communities saying, no, this is where we've lived for a long time, like, you can't just cut it down. It would also be the global community saying, hang on a second, if you cut down those trees where the bats roost, they're going to come live in my backyard and my farm and my garden instead. And that's going to allow the microbes that live in their bodies to come into our bodies and make us sick. And for that reason, to add that whole other level of reason, of justification to constrain industrial expansion, I think that would go a huge way to protecting the public health and the environment generally. I mean, obviously these are problems that are implicated in a lot of the crises we face, not just the biological disaster of the pandemic, but climate change.
Right. I mean, this is all there's it's all part of, I guess, the the broad umbrella of you need to include externalities in your calculations as to the risk reward scenario there, because you know, when people when capitalism offloads the externalities and doesn't calculate them, and we don't realize that they existed until after the fact, that's when we all get screwed. Sonia Shah, the book is Pandemic: Tracking Contagions from Cholera to Ebola and Beyond. And your piece in the Nation magazine is Time to Tell a News Story of Coronavirus. We will link to both those at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.